Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this evening. I am Yves Engler, and this is the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. Doing well this evening. I'm coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, which has long been a meeting place of various First Nations, otherwise known as Montreal. And I have to be out right at 7 this evening, so probably get right to things. I was asked that if in future sessions the people can be able to chat beforehand before it starts. I didn't do that today, but I will try to do that going forward in the future. So if people want to get on a couple minutes early and chit chat among everyone, going forward.
How you doing, sweetheart?
Somebody may not be.
What have you been up to?
See. Okay, yeah, so she's muted. And also Laura is not here this evening, so if anybody maybe can ask somebody, I don't know if Laurel or Yuri maybe could help with if I'm missing anyone when questions and comments come up. But yeah, so I figure I'll get right to it. So this week, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres visited Haiti and pushed for more international support for Haiti. Obviously, this is something that the UN is not well placed to be trusted. The UN, of course, had a 13-plus-year occupation, military occupation, and continues to have a mission in Haiti that is. Sorry, I think it was. I let them mute. Everyone can make sure they're muted.
Am I muted? I've had a problem. It goes on and off.
Okay, I think I've muted everyone now. Yeah. So anyway, so the head of the UN's in Haiti, calling for international support, which is obviously there's major problems in Haiti, but the UN has played a very important role in contributing to those problems. So it's certainly not well placed to be calling for international support. And of course, UN brought cholera to Haiti and then denied it, and then finally admitted it, and then never paid the victims, the 10,000 plus who were killed and hundreds of thousands who were made ill, never paid proper compensation for that. As I mentioned last week, the Canadian government sanctioned André Aped, who was the head of the Group of 184, leading sweatshop owner in Haiti. They sanctioned him, I guess, a week ago, 10 days ago. And Aped responded, which was quoted in a Miami Herald article, where he responded by basically saying that he had good relations with all of the Canadian ambassadors until the current Canadian ambassador, Sébastien Carrière, which was a very interesting kind of response. And he, of course, says that he said he contributed to trying to disarm gangs or persuade to undermine the gangs in Haiti. Now, it's interesting. It's very important. I think it's true that Aped probably did have close relations with most Canadian ambassadors. That is in and of itself quite interesting. It's also absurd to say that he was trying to combat gangs because, as the University of Miami Human Rights Report pointed out in late 2004, Aped actually backed a gang in Cité Soleil, the biggest slum neighborhood of Port-au-Prince, to try to destabilize the Aristide government. So he has connections, political, gang political connections going back quite a while. and that was actually fairly well documented in that report. So the whole sanctions question, Canada's sanctions in Haiti, and how that's playing out is as I pointed out in previous episodes, quite an interesting question. They have sanctioned a lot of the light-skinned elite. They have sanctioned a lot of the most corrupt political officials and most sort of repressive political officials, but they are simultaneously continuing with the core group, simultaneously kind of aligned with U.S. dominance in Haiti. Jean Saint-Ville pointed out, Jacques Haiti, a prominent Haitian Gatineau activist, pointed out something that is just kind of goes to how kind of vicious Canada was against Aristide and how implicated they were in the 2004 coup. He put out the quote that former Canadian ambassador Claude Boucher said on December 9th, 2004, where he told this international forum, quote, this is like public speech, "We hope that Aristide is going to disappear. We believe that he should never come back. We hope an inquiry into his alleged corruption will show Aristide is guilty of so many criminal actions." So this is Canada's ambassador, 8-9 months, talking about the most popular politician in Haitian history, and wanting him to disappear. You're going to find him to be corrupt. Obviously, all this, they worked really hard to find all this corruption that was used to justify the coup. They never got it. They had control of everything for multiple years. They never were able to actually make their case. But it just speaks to just how implicated Canadian officials, openly implicated they were in overthrowing democracy in Haiti. Now, coming up in a couple of days is going to be the 2-year anniversary of Jovenel Moise's assassination in the middle of the night. And still, it's that the sort of legal question is proceeding. There, as I've mentioned previously, there does seem to be more and more indication that the Americans were sort of aware, and it was some like DEA informants that were involved, and so it's still a little bit unclear. I haven't followed it that closely, but what we have Ariel Henry now for 2 years overseeing this interim process that Canada's been backing that has almost no legitimacy. Even the PHTK has finally kind of bailed on Ariel Henry. That's the political party of Jovenel Moïse, of Michel Martelly. And so it's really just left with the backing of Washington and Ottawa. The Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives put out a report titled Canada's Options for Intervening in the Keystone XL CUSMA lawsuit. So the TC Energy is suing the Americans for $15 billion for blocking the Keystone XL. And the CCPA is calling on the Canadian government to intervene in this case on behalf of the American government. And it basically, I didn't read the full report, but I read a story about it. They're basically, and a summary, and they're basically saying that if the Canadian company can win this court case in this investor tribunal, that undermines not just the U.S. ability to legislate on behalf of lessening the climate crisis, but it will have implications kind of more broadly. So they're pressuring the Canadian government. They detail why exactly the Canadian government should intervene to oppose the Canadian company's lawsuit against the U.S. government. And this goes to the whole question of these international investor dispute settlement tribunals, which are just a total farce. They're just structured to give corporations even more power than they already have, and they already, of course, have too much power. François-Philippe Champagne, the industry minister, he tweeted out, quote, "Pleased to host with my colleague Jonathan WNV Shell's first global board of directors meeting in Canada. With a strong and historic presence in our country, Shell is our reliable partner together we can and will pave the way for tomorrow's green economy. So this is just more of the complete ridiculousness of the Canadian Trudeau government working with the oil companies that are destroying some of the principal destroyers of climate stability, and framing this as the green alternative. And this is what our officials do. As of course forest fires worsen, as climate disturbances just get more and more clear. The Pentagon admitted a couple days ago that that Chinese balloon was not a spy balloon, that it was just a weather balloon that went off course. And so all that brouhaha about China and then the blowing up of the balloons and spending like hundreds of $1,000s to blow up $12 balloons and stuff like that, that was all a big freak out about nothing. Now, Caitlin Johnston on Twitter pointed out, she said, quote, "Cannot stop laughing at how all mass media still insist on calling it a Chinese spy balloon, even while reporting that the balloon did zero spying," right? So they whipped up such a story about it being a spy balloon that even when they're debunking it being a spy balloon, they have to refer to it as a spy balloon. It just goes to the, how frenzied this whole China fear mongering is in the North American media and political landscape. And in a sign of that, rabble.ca, left-wing, 20 plus years left-wing website, they published Carl Nuremberg, who's I think one of their, Carl on the Hill, I guess he's their Ottawa kind of bureau person. They published this report based upon, I believe it's a Senate, maybe the House of Commons committee, but I think it was a Senate committee. And it's titled, "In Tibet, China Should Not Emulate Canadian Residential School System." And I, of course, agree that China should not emulate Canada's residential school system in Tibet or elsewhere. But it just goes to this, the left buying into this whole, China frenzy, and, hyping. This is all being used, of course, to de-link and decouple economically from China, and on the grounds that they're allegedly, ethnocidal, if not genocidal, policies in Tibet against Tibetans, and it just fits with it feeds the target China kind of beast. Stephen Harper attended a MEK, the Iranian opposition a group that's been referred to as a cult, back to Iraq and the Iran-Iraq war, and has been implicated in all kinds of assassinations in Iran, working with Israel, apparently been funded by Saudi Arabia. So Harper again participated in their event, and the Canadian government, and they've been doing that, right? They, Erwin Kotler worked to get the MEK, which had previously been on the US and Canadian terrorist list, to get it removed. And so they've been really sort of, as part of this campaign to target Iran, anyone, even a group that has almost no backing in Iran, is certainly not supported by, by very, very fringe minority of Iranians. They're, so long as they're willing to do Washington and Tel Aviv's dirty work, they get political endorsement within Canada. And on the Iran front, Iran actually took Canada to the International Court of Justice over the theft of Iranian assets, right? There's been these decisions by Canadian courts to give all kinds of money to actually Americans who claim to have been victims of Iranian terror, because Iranians were supposedly supporting Hamas and I believe Hezbollah, and Americans who were killed attacks that were blamed on Hamas and Hezbollah. I've written about this in the past. It's really quite a stretch, but there was some major rulings given, huge amounts of money given, and then there was a ruling given about Iranian assets regarding the flight blown up there a handful of years ago. I guess it's about 3.5 years ago now, that where Iran almost certainly mistakenly blew up the Ukrainian Canadian flight 752, I believe it is. And 175 people were killed, a big chunk of whom were Iranian Canadians. And so Iran took Canada to the International Court of Justice, which is the UN's court. And it said in its claim, it says, Canada has adopted and implemented a series of legislative, executive, and judicial measures against Iran and its property since 2012 in breach of its international obligations. And I don't, I'm not a lawyer, but I would trust that Iran actually has a pretty strong case. Conversely, Canada, Ukraine, Sweden, and the UK brought Iran to the International Court of Justice over a question of compensation regarding the victims of the flight that they blew up. Now, of course, the context of blowing up the flight is absolutely essential, which is the Americans blew up the Iranian General Soleimani in Iraq, killed a bunch of Iranians, a number of Iraqis, and it was a real, serious act of American terror. And then in response, Iran targeted some American facilities in Iraq. And then it was right after that the Iranians, again, almost certainly mistakenly thinking it was the Americans were responding to their attacks on American facilities in Iraq, that they blew up the plane. And lost in all this is any condemnation, of course, of US, overt crime that there was no error. It was an act of open and aggressive American criminality. But all that's now lost in the sort of Canadian media picture and political picture on this question. Now, the Zionist entity, if you like, or the Israeli government is in the midst of launching this big, horrible raid into the Jenin refugee camp, which about 15,000 people live in, people who were mostly displaced by Zionist ethnic cleansing. And this is, I think 9 people have been killed, and I think we're expecting those numbers to go up. And they're destroying, there's images of them destroying, bulldozing like streets and stuff like that. And we're expecting those numbers to go up. And this is happening, of course, as the Israelis are openly announcing even more settlement expansion, huge increase in settlement expansion this year. We have this also Israel yesterday bombed Syria again, bombed Homs, which is apparently the 19th time they bombed Syria this year, including airports that were bringing in earthquake relief. And we have this, far right Israeli government, openly Jewish supremacist, and CJPME condemned Liberal MP Anthony Housefather, who's the head of the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group, who I disrupted there a few weeks ago. He met with Simcha Rothman, who's a far-right official in the current Israeli government, pushing this sort of judicial coup, and who has openly supported Jewish settler violence. And so this is a Housefather who, of course, frames himself as this, defender of minority rights here in Quebec, as somebody who's like a liberal, concerned about, and meeting with these far right fascistic officials because they are representing his beloved Israeli state. The Hill Times had a story that I missed. It was from a few weeks ago, mid-June, titled "Incoming Sponsored Travel Rules for Lobbyists Will Limit Educational Opportunity for MPs and Senators, Stay CIJA and Results Canada." And in the story, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs complains that these new lobbying rules are going to restrict the trips that they offer, these free trips to Israel that they offer. And the new lobbying rules don't actually stop MPs from going on free trips to Israel or anywhere for that matter. But what they do is that they if you do that, you're not then allowed to lobby that MP. So if it's basically, it can't be viewed as a junket, right? It can't be viewed as like a donation, like giving a free gift to this MP. And so the CIJA says it's just this educational tour. But so there'll be rules on sort of when that group that provides a free trip can then have any contact with that MP. Seems like a totally sensible tightening of lobbying rules, but CIJA, who deny that these trips are actually sort of a way to like kind of woo MPs, is complaining that this will undermine of course what they're doing, which is the wooing of MPs process. So we'll see how that plays out if they are actually able to defeat these new rulers. Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly in a closed-door meeting of a Knesset Foreign Affairs Committee, he said, quote, "We need the Palestinian Authority. We cannot allow it to collapse. We also do not want it to collapse. We are ready to help it financially. We have an interest in the PA continuing to work. Where it succeeds in operating, it does the job for us, and we have no interest in it failing." That's a pretty strong endorsement of the Palestinian Authority as the overseer of Israel's occupation. Okay, we've of course known that. That's been clear for a long time, and the Canadian government has been right at the center of that process, right, of turning the Palestinian Authority into a tool of Israel's occupation. Most importantly, through training and funding and working with the Palestinian Authority security forces. And that's where most of Canadian aid for many years to the Palestinians went, to supporting this Palestinian Authority security force to basically be an arm of Israel's occupation in the West Bank. And that continues, right? It was really, really overt during the Harper government, but that process continues through Operation Proteus. And so it's just important to know, even when we talk about aid to Palestinians, oftentimes it's really aid to Israel's occupation, as Netanyahu helps us understand. A couple days ago, B'nai B'rith put out a statement announcing that they were suing David Miviser, Rabbi David Miviser. And they said they're suing him because he referred to B'nai B'rith as racist, as an anti-Palestinian hate group, as an agent of a foreign power, and small band of extremists enabled by wealthy racists. I don't see any problem with any of what Miviser said. I have said fairly similar things, and so have others. Stephen Ellis, a couple months ago, has his long piece in Mondoise. It documented, I think the title is B'nai B'rith's Malignant Racism. It documents its history of very overt racism. And I think it's kind of remarkable how down the path of smears and lawsuits B'nai B'rith is, that they are suing a rabbi. This is, I personally think it's potentially a real opportunity to further discredit this group that crazily still has some credibility among leftist and progressive organizations. And I think it's a real opportunity, I mean, to campaign around this and really talk about this lawsuit. I think it's, suing, Miviser is like a, I mean, he's retired now, but he was in charge of, I think, the biggest or one of the biggest synagogues in Vancouver for like 20 years or like 25 years, long time. And obviously he's now very aligned with pro-Palestinian activism. I think that's why they're suing him. I don't think they're suing him primarily because of his what he said about B'nai B'rith, but because of his stuff on the charities question, on the Sorel, and some of the legal complaints that he's part of. And they want to further, this is part of a whole process of trying to discredit him, including among sort of like soft Zionists, who, of course, it's awkward for people who are, Jewish, liberal kind of Zionists, and seeing that a rabbi is making these critiques, it kind of makes it hard to claim it's all about anti-Semitism. So I think that's a big part of what they're doing with this. But I think it's just stunning. It's outrageous, and it just shows how far down the path they've gone of this sort of smear and legal action, and they often succeed. They failed lots of time. There are examples. CUPW won a recent case against them, a defamation, a settlement. Dimitri Lascaris won a settlement, but they intimidate the NDP. So, anyways, we'll see where this goes with the Miviser suit. Now, last couple of days, there's been a couple of days marking Congolese Independence Day was on the 30th, and then Lumumba's birth, Patrice Lumumba's birth, I think that was on the 2nd, and then William Stairs, the birth of William Stairs on July 1st. So I thought I would delve a little bit into Canada-Congo and Canada's role in the impoverishment of Congo. And unfortunately, it's a deep history. I'm not going to get into all of it, but just to touch on a couple elements to this, and it of course has relevance to today. And so William Stairs was one of the first graduates of Royal Military College in Kingston, and that was set up to in 1876 to train proper white gentlemen, as one historian put it, to be officers of British imperialism in Africa primarily, but in India, Afghanistan, elsewhere, and also, of course, within conquering current day Canada. And Stairs ends up working for the Belgian King Leopold II on two different expeditions. The first expedition of Europeans that crossed through the center of Africa, and then which Stairs documents as a diary, which he detailed was just unbelievably horrific things that he did, and it was to be published upon his death, just like murdering. They just as the poet, the former Canadian poet laureate, I'm forgetting his name right now, a swashbuckling mass murderer. That's how they referred to William Stairs. And then after that mission, he leads up, I believe it leaves in 1887 or thereabouts, that conquers Katanga, the east of Congo, for Belgian King Leopold. King Leopold, of course, becomes infamous for the rubber extraction that leads to millions and millions of Congolese being killed. They, chop off the hands and all the horrible stuff that people may be familiar with. When they didn't have you didn't fulfill your rubber quota, you or your kids would have their hands cut off. So Stairs helps conquer that part of the eastern part of Congo for the Belgian king, and the latter part, with regards to Lumumba and Congolese independence, the two different dates that just passed. Canada played an important role in Lumumba's assassination, right? Canada was at the center of the UN mission that undermined Lumumba. Canadian officials very consciously worked to undermine Lumumba through the UN mission, and Diefenbaker was hostile to Lumumba. Everything, they used aid as a tool. They channeled it through the UN to give the UN all this authority over Lumumba, over Congo. They supported Mobutu as Mobutu worked to undermine Lumumba. They when Lumumba was put under house arrest, they oversaw that, and then they blocked him from mobilizing his forces when there was this basically a coup against him. And then when Lumumba escapes house arrest and he's trying to get his power base in I think the Oriental province, the Canadian Jean Bautume, who's the head of Chief of Staff of the UN mission, tracks Lumumba, tells Mobutu where he is, sends a plane with Canadian officer to capture him, which succeeds, and then not long later, Lumumba's assassinated, his body is dissolved in acid. So Canada, after the US and the Belgians, really was the third player in Lumumba's assassination, and that obviously had a very damaging effect on Congo's development and has implications right up until today. Anita Anand was in the UK a few days ago. She tweeted out about meeting with the head of BAE Systems, the CEO, Charles Woodburn, which is, of course, a big UK arms company. I think it's maybe the biggest UK arms company, number one and number two. And then she also later on tweeted out, quote, "Together, Canada and the United Kingdom fought," Anita Anand, of course, being Canada's defense minister, "Together, Canada and United Kingdom fought to secure freedom and democracy in the 20th century. In the 21st century, we are once again called upon to lead in Europe, in the Indo-Pacific, at home and around the globe. We are stepping up to meet this moment." So apparently the UK fought to secure freedom and democracy in the 20th century. I mean, this is unbelievable. In the first half of the 20th century, there was no force that was responsible for more a destruction of freedom than the British Empire. I mean, this is just such a glorification of colonialism, of brutality. It's just remarkable that this happens and there's no comment, right? What did the British do in Kenya? The destruction of the Mau Mau, maybe 100,000 murdered. All kinds of horror. Canada was involved in that, I should point out. Destroying Palestinian resistance in the mid-1930s. The Boer concentration camps, tens of thousands killed, both of Boer and also Black South Africans. The famine in India, millions and millions killed, partition, all kinds of massacres in India. This is all being completely whitewashed. British were fighting for freedom. And that's, it's just incredible to see that. This is where we're at in the imperial colonial ideology in our country. There was a report a couple of days ago. The Globe article was titled Canada's Cyber Spy Agency Okay to Conduct More Foreign Ops Report. So there's a report about the Communication Security Establishment, which is essentially Canada's version of the NSA. It's the foreign-focused intelligence agency, which has, for many decades, was part of the Department of National Defense. And now I think it's got some sort of standalone kind of, sort of still reports to the defense minister, but it's a bit more bureaucratically removed. And in this story, they talk about a few things. One is that the budget has gone up to $1 billion now. And I think it's something like, I think it's over 3,000 employees of the CSE. And they talk about in 2017, the Liberals passed legislation further empowering CSE to carry out offensive operations against foreign actors. And we don't know, it's all secretive, of course, and this report is, most of what's in it's all, secretive too. So the media stories don't tell us that much about what actually happened. But what they say is that the CSE received authorization to conduct one defensive operation and 3 active operations, which is some sort of offensive foreign operation, which could include, we don't know this, but could include like attempting to knock another country's electricity grid off, right? That's the type of stuff that's potentially that the CSE can potentially do, because you can do all that through, electronic kind of hacking and all kinds of things I know nothing about or very little about. Now what we do know, little bits that we've pieced together about CSE's operation, in the Snowden revelations, they pointed out that CSE spied on Brazil's Department of Mines and Energy. Okay, so there's all kinds of evidence that they've been more and more involved in sort of supporting corporate Canada or economic interests of Canada globally. We also know, of course, that the CSE has been assisting Canadian military. So the head of the CSE, it had been all very, very secretive until about a decade ago. It's like it existed since, well, it sort of basically started during World War II, but formally after World War II. And it wasn't even admitted that it existed from its first 3 decades, more than first 3 decades. I forget exact year now, but finally there's a CBC report and then there's some admission. Like the CSE is Canada's main contribution to the Five Eyes. That wasn't admitted until I think the mid 1990s. So this first like 5 decades, there's no admission of it even existing, the Five Eyes, and similarly with the CSE. But more recently, the CSE's been more a bit more kind of like boastful of what they're doing, partly to justify increasing their spending, and also there's been a little bit of very, very nominal kind of oversight, very nominal. But the CSE, the head of the CSE, boasted about how they provide all the actionable intelligence in Afghanistan. So almost certainly the CSE supports the Canadian military wherever they're going to war. There's evidence the CSE, of course, is supporting the Ukrainian military right now. That's one element, of course, we hear not enough about, is the role of Western intelligence in assisting the Ukrainians in fighting the Russians. So this report is saying that the CSE this year, very little information coming out, but admitting that they got the special okay from the defense minister for 3 of these foreign, what they call active operations, which we don't know what they were exactly. So the CSE, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute did a webinar on the CSE about a year and a half ago. It's worth listening to if you're interested in it, because it really is an important part of Canadian foreign policy that is very little known about it. So as we move to the NATO conference in, I think in Lithuania, there's more of a push for Canada to increase its military spending. During Anita Anand's visit in the UK, the CBC published a story saying, UK Defense Secretary urges Canada to hit NATO military spending target. The Ottawa Citizen published a story about the Canada's planned purchase of 16 P-8 Boeing surveillance aircraft for $7.8 billion. And this story quotes the American officials giving the okay for the sale to Canada, and it says that basically that it will support the U.S. empire, which is what we know about Canadian military spending. So the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency, that I guess has to okay these arms sales, says, quote, this proposed sale will increase Canadian maritime forces interoperability with the United States and other allied forces, as well as their ability to contribute to missions of mutual interest. So not only is an American company making a whole bunch of money on this, but it will strengthen the Canadian military's ability to work and advance the American military's objectives. The Senate also put out a report saying that urging Canada to buy Arctic capable submarines. This is going to cost billions and billions of dollars more. Fortunately, there's a little bit of resistance to this type of crazy militarism. There was a nice placard that was organized that in the context of the forest fire, saying water bombers not F-35 fighters. There's protest plan next week against the against NATO. I know there's one in Montreal. I saw I forget the other city. I saw some announcement for, so people should look at your local cities about possible protests against NATO. Now, it was interesting in the UK. Anita Anand, one story said, quote, was headlined, Anand won't join calls to fast track Ukraine into NATO. So Canada's kind of pulling the brakes alongside the Biden on the full-fledged push forward with Ukraine joining NATO, which is interesting. Not that surprising. I don't believe Ukraine's going to get into NATO right now. I think that's too crazy. And to some extent, this is, I mean, Ukrainians are being, and the Ukrainian government is kind of being played for fools. They're not even going to end up getting into NATO. They're probably not even going to end up getting into the EU. And it's just their country's just going to be wrecked, and they're not even going to get the, some of what they were expecting or wanting on the security front in the EU. We'll see how this all plays out, but that's certainly a plausible scenario of what's going on. As part of this sort of example of how much the Ukrainian government has gone to just being tied in with NATO and Washington and Canada and UK, they've passed legislation mandating that government employees be able to speak English. Okay, so they banned, Russian language media, books, etc., all kinds of stuff. But now they're basically forcing their government employees, to speak English, which just is an indication of where things are going in terms of it becoming a total vassal of Washington, of the Anglosphere. The Financial Times had this story titled "Defense Shares Tumble After Aborted Russian Rebellion." So the Wagner rebellion, coup attempt, effort to, for a more hardline military position, whatever exactly it was, for a more, as I think, as Prigozhin, or however you pronounce his name, would say, a more hardline and a well-organized military mission. They, after this, the cost of the stock prices tumble. And the story begins, US and European defense stocks fell heavily yesterday, being the Monday of last week, as some investors bet that political instability in Russia could hamper the Kremlin's war effort and shorten the conflict in Ukraine. Right? So all these arms companies are like, oh no, Russia's looking weaker, and this proxy war is not going to go on forever, and we're not going to keep making huge bucks forever. And so the stocks got hit, presumably with a certain degree of stability looking like it's returned in Russia. The stocks maybe have gone back up, and they can excitedly try to prolong this war for as long as possible. But that's how the arms industry works. A story titled "MPs Call for Sanctions on Foreign Aggressors Targeting Canada with Disinformation." The story said, quote, "MPs are urging the Liberal government to levy sanctions against individuals and organizations who target Canadians with disinformation." Right? It's all a little bit unclear. They sort of frame it as if you're targeting China or Russia or Iran, but individuals, disinformation, that could be the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. As we know, a lot of people consider this all disinformation. So we'll see where that goes. It's just a further little piece in this broader kind of climate of McCarthyite kind of climate that, of course, we've seen the peace with Russia, one handshake at a time, I believe, is the title of Dimitri Lascaris's tour, which I just saw that there's an effort to shut him down tonight in Ottawa. There was a success in having the venue canceled right at the last minute here in Montreal. Unfortunately, I had parental duties and a friend from out of town, so I wasn't able to go to the event that was ultimately held, I think, fairly successfully in a park fairly close to the venue. Now, obviously, as people know, Dimitri has been, called a Putin apologist, paid by Russia, a tanky. And now, in the last little bit, there's this little segment of self-described leftists on Twitter who've taken a new tact in this bid to cancel the tour. This Twitter account called the Acerbic Nerd. It's a anonymous account. Reportedly, it's Jonah Hundert, who's a former left-wing activist, actor in Toronto now, who runs it. And it's all about like targeting what they define as tankies. And they've been going at Dimitri's tour, all kinds of reasons. It's like mostly associational. Dimitri he went on some media program that person has some bad views about trans issues, or Dimitri, one of the organizers of Dimitri's event, who was a lawyer for those being persecuted around Rwanda genocide, or that person, one of the organizers there was a TERF, and then it's like mostly associational politics. Okay, now it's crazy that somebody who's anonymous on Twitter, it's so cowardly that they're all about associational politics, right? Leaving that aside, what they've now done, they've moved to this new terrain, and they're basically saying, and this is taken up by Dan Colin, who's this self-described anti-fascist who works for the Canada Anti-Hate Network. He writes for them. I'm not sure exactly what he does for them, but he lists them as somewhere he's works. And he's taken up this thing that Dimitri's tour should be shut down because of the attack against the gender studies class at Waterloo University. Okay. And the reason is that Dimitri apparently went on some podcast or some event that was promoting free speech online. And apparently within this free speech push, I guess there's people who are like some of the people that's tied into like being banned for anti-trans kind of positions. And so the logic here is that by pushing this free speech thing, you're opening the possibility for this anti-trans kind of rhetoric. And therefore, and then this probably, we don't really know what happened, exactly why this gender studies was targeted. It's not clear if it was trans or queer related or anti-feminist. So it's all a little bit unclear, but it seems like it's sort of this hate attack against gender studies. And so now Dimitri's tour needs to be canceled because he went on to some free speech thing that included people, I guess, who have dubious views on trans issues. And they're pushing this, and they're openly saying he's got to be canceled because of this. And to me, this is just like they've just totally deluded. It's just like they've gone down the path of they hate criticism of Canadian foreign policy, of NATO so much that there's like, they're going to find some reason that like they have to, and like ideally kind of a leftist reason for why these peace events need to be shut down. It's just absolutely remarkable, but it clearly has a little, and like this is pretty marginal. I don't want to exaggerate it, but it has a little bit of currency in a segment of this kind of left world where they can give their sort of like left spin on this like out and out kind of like, Canadian military and US government funded academics who are leading the charge against Dimitri's tour. And then the Ukrainian Canadian Congress, right-wing groups leading the charge. And now they can have this sort of like a left-wing spin on another reason why he needs to be shut down. It's a pretty stunning to watch. Now, of course, the hypocrisy is just like out, like beyond belief. So Dan Colin used to work for United Jewish Appeal of Toronto. Okay, United Jewish Appeal, of course, is the sponsor of the Walk with Israel, right? Every year. It's the sponsor of CIJA, the main apartheid lobby group, and a whole bunch of other anti-Palestinian groups. So if you want to talk about like associational politics, Dan Collins' like association with like vicious anti-Palestinianism is like infinitely greater than Dimitri's association with somebody who's anti-trans. But the nature of how power works and how, you know, what issues the association matters on is such that of course those, you know, banning Dan Cullen from publicly speaking is never kind of raised. Now, finally, I guess I've been going on and maybe a little on the long side here. Finally, Melanie Joly, about, I guess maybe it was last Monday or Sunday, she talks about how Canada needs more influence in international affairs. And this was reported, it was on the front page in National Post. I think it was a CTV interview she did. And then it got picked up a few places and some right-wingers were like commentating and saying, no, Canada, you know, needs to, you know, as part of having more influence in the world, needs more military spending and a few different kind of comments on it. And I wrote a piece, which you can see on my site, published by Dissident Voice, and basically saying it's the total opposite. Of course, Canada needs less influence in the world, right? And I go through the ways in which Canada has too much influence, right? G7 member, one of the founders of of NATO, the Bretton Woods Institution, still has way too much voting as a share of Canada's population versus its voting share at the IMF and World Bank. It's, you know, corporate power. It's, you know, far over, I mean, the most egregious example being in the mining sector, but far overrepresented banking, mining, engineering, private security companies, on and on. Its diplomatic might, you know, from Canadians in positions throughout the UN structure, from the Francophonie to the Commonwealth, you know, Canadians speaking the two colonial languages, you know, way too much diplomatic power. Montreal is one of the 8 UN cities that hosts important UN bodies. On the climate, you know, Canada's taken up way too much of the global carbon budget as leading per capita greenhouse gas emitter. And that, you know, in her speeches about Canada needs more influence, she basically says so because of China's rise. Well, China's 35 times Canada's population. China doesn't have 35 times Canada's global influence, right? China and India are the 2 biggest countries in the world per person, you know, per capita, most people. They should be the 2 most powerful countries, right? The US is like a quarter of the size and has way more, has certainly than India, and substantially more influence than China, right? If you believe in equality, you have to believe that Canada needs less influence in global affairs. No one in Canadian media or politicians or NGOs will say that openly. But if you believe in one person, you know, like if you believe we're all equal here, Canada needs less influence in the world. And so I think we have to be clear about that. It's makes a lot of people uncomfortable to say that, but I think it is the reality. And that's all I got. And unfortunately, I'm tight on time, but if there's any comments and questions, go ahead, Nadia.
Yes, thank you, Yves. I have a couple of questions and comments. First of all, I didn't quite understand when you say that China doesn't have, did I understand correctly that you said they don't have Uyghur camps that persecute Uyghurs? Did I understand correctly?
No, I didn't say that.
You said something about similar.
I said it was about Tibet. I just talked about the Rabble publishing a story about Tibet, about Tibet, there being residential schools in Tibet.
But does that mean that they shouldn't be reprimanded about the Uyghur camps they have?
I think that you know, the question of the Uyghur is highly politicized. And I don't believe it's genocide like some people have tried to claim. I don't think that the UN hasn't even come up with that. There's been delegations of Muslim countries who reject that. I think that comes from Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, who got the Americans to claim that, and then the Canadian Parliament followed on, calling it a genocide. And if you look at that, Zenz, the academic, a very far right individual who is the source of these claims, doesn't hold up. Does the Chinese government have a centralizing political and cultural outlook and policies? That seems to make sense to me. I know they do officially grant minority rights, language rights and other rights. So, that's, but I don't think that the criticism of the Uyghurs, I mean, like, if you just look at like the forces that are driving this stuff about like China mistreating its minority Muslim population, these are the people who've been like bombing every different Muslim country, and like the idea that they care about Muslim rights is really far-fetched. And also, as I mentioned last week, Modi, the Indian prime minister, whose like politics is centered, really important part of his politics is being anti-Muslim as part of this Hindu nationalist ideology, and has like, overseen this, implicated in the massacre back 20 years ago, and all kinds of policies about driving Muslims out of the country and taking away their citizenship, and pogroms against Muslims, promoting this. And like the Chinese government's, India's hostility towards Muslims is way more central to the current Indian government's policies than it is to the Chinese government's policies. And yet we're being told that like we have to like sanction China because it's mistreating Muslims, while like Modi goes to Washington, and we're all about the whole Canadian Indo-Pacific strategy is about like deepening ties with the Indian government. So, I don't think that this is motivated. Certainly, I'm totally confident that this is not motivated by concern for human rights. And I think it's the specifics of the allegations are massively exaggerated. Yeah.
But that just because the critics are wrong, two wrongs don't make a right. It doesn't make China less of a country that persecutes just because Indians persecute the Muslims more. I don't think that's a very powerful.
I agree, but it has very little to do with us.
Okay.
I think that that's really important for people to center.
There's
right?
another issue that I wanted to bring up. When you say that individuals who speak up against the war in Ukraine will be silenced, this is very serious, because then I'm afraid I'm going to go to prison. Now, the other day I wrote something on Twitter about the Ukrainians. I said the Ukrainians have a right to protest, but they drowned out, the other day, they drowned out the talk by Lascaris, because they were screaming insult at us, and the police was not shutting them up. And when I went to speak to the police, they said they have a right to protest. I said, yes, they have a right to protest, but they don't have a right to drown us out. So some Nazi group or anti-Nazi group, I don't know what they are, they put my name in their Nazi, on the Nazi list. This is very serious. I mean, when critics of the Ukraine war are being silenced, we're back in the McCarthy era, and it's even worse than the McCarthy era. And then, there's, anyway, I forgot there are other things I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, well, I don't have that much time. I mean, I agree. I think what's happened with the Dimitri tour is stunning. I think it's stunning, and I think it's stunning that a big chunk of the left is pushing this. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, thank you. I've been thinking about how Russiagate and the handling of Trump's regrettable election to power was handled by the Democratic Party, and there's the insistence that it happened because of Russia, which is just, which is laughable. Even if there were, even if Prigozhin had some sort of a Facebook campaign, that does not explain an election. But one thing that did was it drummed up all this xenophobic, anti-Russian sentiment on the side that many people identify as the left. And I don't see it as the left, I see it as like the liberal left. But it's been very disorienting. I don't really think we've gotten over it politically. Whereas the attacks, like xenophobic attacks, and allegations of Chinese interference, although I think there's a similar political trend here that we need to be aware of. Coming up here in Canada, saying Chinese interference in elections, making people afraid and putting this chilling effect on who you can associate with, coming from the right. And it does confuse the left, right? And I think we need to obviously, maintain that the left has to have a very vocal anti-war and NATO position. It always has been a left-wing position. That hasn't changed. But I'm thinking to myself, Eva, about what happens down the road as this war continues. What kind of choices is China going to have to face? To what extent might we decide that we're not just moving deeper into war with Russia, but that in fact we're facing certain implications with China, and how some of the xenophobic propaganda at home plays into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing that already play out. The sort of targeting of Chinese Canadian groups, and one of the things in the CSE, the Communication Security Establishment, was boasting that they were providing intel on the Chinese police stations, these very mysterious Chinese police stations that are apparently community groups here in Montreal, a long-standing kind of basically left-wing community group, been around for like 40, 50 years, accused of being a Chinese police station. RCMP investigate. No one really knows what's happening, still hanging over their head. So I think that it's obviously stoking that kind of dynamic. The sort of panic around Trump, and I don't think obviously the US is way bigger media hub, and the whole Russiagate thing, the level of kind of propaganda around that is like a global affair, and even bigger than this business about Chinese interference in Canada. But it's similar kind of dynamics. And the point, there's a partisan element to the Chinese interference. Partisan element is about the conservatives and the NDP kind of smashing the liberals. But the bigger picture is that this is all about trying to create an impression that it's China that's the aggressor, and therefore China's coming after us, and therefore we have to be aggressive against it. That's it's all about, laying the basis, the justification for aggressive policies towards China. And I think it's working. It's succeeding at the public opinion and ideological realm. I don't think it's succeeding as much as the media is pumping it. I don't think most people actually really, care that much about the David Johnson's foreign interference committee stuff. And, I think that's hyped, but it creates this sort of negative narrative of China for average people. So it's important to push back, and there's been some pushback by leftists in the States, like my old friend Aaron Mate, of course, right at the center of that on the Russiagate business. But yeah, it needs to be similar kind of things need to take place with regards to the China question in Canada. I see, Joan, you have one question. I actually really do need to go. So if you have a quick
Quick
comment,
one. I mean, this
otherwise.
is that with freedom of speech.
So I'll leave it at that. Thanks everyone. Hope everyone has a good evening, and same place, same time next week. Take care.